This video is designed to help reinforce the skills you learned in the PowerPoint, and it's broken up into 9 different sections. To begin, we'll talk a little bit about how to start the program, how to set up the basic controls before we move on to some of the default settings, and then how to use the find function. Then we'll talk about markers, how to place, edit, and delete them. Then a little bit about sectoring the map, estimating distance. We'll talk about how to manipulate GPS data before finally ending with printing and exporting the map. Okay, I'm going to assume that if you've gotten this far, you've already been to the MapTech website to download and install the demo version of Terrain Navigator. Go ahead and open up the program. Click on Demo. And then there's 2 ways to find a map. As you saw in the PowerPoint, you can click on a quadrangle to open up that map, or you can use the find function and search by street address, city, town, zip code, etc. So on this demo version, which happens to be based in Massachusetts, there's only one map to open, which is Newburyport. So let's go and open that up. Okay, before we get into the nuts and bolts of Terrain Navigator, I want to mention the most important key in the program, which is F1. That is the help function. So you press F1 and you get the help menu. And you can search just an index of terms. So if I want to find out something about coordinates, I start typing that in. It takes me to coordinates. There's a table of contents that starts off with the basics and goes down to layers and talks in great detail about a lot of stuff we're going to talk about very briefly. Then finally there's the search. So another one, if I want to find out something about coordinates, I type that in and I hit list topics, and this is everything that talks about coordinates. So you can find answers to some of your different questions here. And this is a good resource. Get familiar with it. It's very helpful, especially when you're out in the middle of the woods alone and there's no one to turn around and ask. Okay, as you saw in the PowerPoint, there are many different tools that do many different things within the program. Fortunately, really only a few of them you're going to have to worry about on a regular basis. So, one you're going to want to have selected most of the time is this drag tool, and it is just that. You left click on the map, hold your mouse down, and you can drag the map around to wherever you like. Another important button on here is the marker tool. So you select that, looks like a little triangle. You can mark different spots on the map just by left clicking, releasing. We'll go through that in a minute. The other important buttons on here are the map scale and the zoom level. So if you select map scale, you'll notice there's 5 different options here. The one that you want to be in most of the time is 1 to 25,000 T. Now that stands for topographic map 1 to 25,000 scale. Those maps are loaded onto the hard drive of the computer, and they pull off very quickly, and they give you a pretty good picture of what's going on. The 1 to 12,000 has your basic aerial imagery, and this comes from a number of different sources, and this is pretty good. It's not updated as often as Google Earth, but it's still useful to get an idea of tree cover and whatnot. Some parts of the country have aerial imageries at an even smaller scale, 1 to 7,200. That's not common. I've noticed in Texas, most of the aerial imagery is 1 to 12,000. The other thing you'll notice as I clicked on the different map source, it has to pull data off the internet to load it onto the map. So Once the data is on here, it's cached, and you can use it when you're offline or don't have a network connection. But if you want to look at new data, you have to have a network connection to be able to pull it down. So what we've tried to do on the team computer is load most of the local area and our popular search areas with the cached data so we can use it offline. But if you select something and get this white screen, wait a minute, it will pull new data in. So let's go and select the 1 to 25,000. Again, that's the best one to just kind of poke around in. The zoom level, 1 to 1 means, regular scale. You can zoom in with, or zoom out with 1 to 2 and zoom out with 1 to 4 and then zoom in all the way to 2 to 1. So another way to do that is to use the scroll button on your mouse. You can zoom out, you can zoom in, easy as that. Okay, let's talk about setting the default preferences for a moment. If you come up here to File and then go down to Preferences, you'll see some of the things we talked about on the PowerPoint. Coordinates, custom grids, GPS setup. If you click on one of these, what you'll get is the default setting that Terrain Navigator will use when you start. So while we're on the GPS here, we want this to always be set to the Garmin GPS map 60 CSX USB, right? Because that's going to be the one we're using most of the time. If someone brings you a GPS with a different model, so one of our data loggers or an old Garmin 5 or 76, most of those things are on the list here. Just come through and find them, and you can have the program read the GPS that way. Another section to look at is markers. What this will do, this will set the default marker type you get when you add a new marker to the map. So if you click on symbol, you'll see there's a whole number of different kinds of symbols you can use. So there's a skull and crossbones, there's flags, there's a yin yang. Keep it simple, don't get too cute. My favorite one is the hollow circle, set to probably about a size 10. What that does is it's small and it doesn't get in the way. It's hollow, so you're not covering up chunks of the map that might be useful or important with filled in symbols. So set that. Come out here to color. Blue is a good color that shows up against anything. It's darker than this blue water, so it contrasts pretty well. It stands out against the green. It even stands out against the black. So blue is a pretty good color to use. If you go to labels, here's where you can set your default label size. Same with markers. You don't want your labels to be so large that they interfere with information on the map that people might need to see, but you want to be large enough to be legible. So if you come down to font, 10 is a good size, 9 works out pretty well. Don't get too fancy on your font types or your styles. Arial narrow works great. We don't need to get any fancier than that. So take a look at some of these settings. The key with Terrain Navigator is practice, practice, practice. So take a few minutes, poke around through here, and see what the different settings do and get familiar with them. It's nothing more complicated than that. Okay, another common task within the program is to find a specific location based on coordinates or an address someone gives you. So that's actually a pretty simple operation. If you come up here to Find and click on Coordinates, you'll get this menu. So I have an 8-digit grid coordinate someone gave me. So I'll set it to USNG 10 meters and I'll enter it in. So the coordinate, we'll use the one from the PowerPoint, is 19 Tango Charlie Hotel 4688 by 4206. And set to NAT83. And if I click on Replace Active, it should center the map here on the Newberry Turnpike. Right? That's just the way it happened on the PowerPoint. So you can also search by street address, city, town, zip code, pretty much whatever you want. You just have to make sure you have a map loaded for where it's going to go. So right now we're looking at a map that's based in Massachusetts. If I put a Texas zip code into it, it's not going to work. A handy feature though is that it lists all of the zip codes that are displayed on the map. So This is a rather short list because it's just a demo version, but if we had all of the maps for Texas in here, in theory, all of the zip codes for Texas would be in there, and you could scroll through and find the one you want. So if we want to go to Byfield, you click on that, replace active, it takes you to the center of the zip code that's in Byfield. Okay, another common task within the program is to create and edit markers. So what I'm going to do, I'll scroll around on my map here and say we want to mark this little pond right here. So I'm going to come up, I'm going to select on my marker tool, that's the little triangle, I'll drop it right in the middle of the pond, and I'll get a marker and a label. So you remember we set the label and the marker to a default type earlier. If I want to edit this, it's pretty simple. I right click on it and I get a menu. So I can edit it, I can look at the information, which lists several interesting things. I can hide it, delete it, lock it. I can center a range ring around here. I can send this specific marker to a GPS, but we just want to edit it. So I click on that, and then we're looking at marker number 8. These are all of the other markers that are currently loaded on the map. So I can rename it to something else. Say I want it to be Pond 01. I can change the color. We can change the coordinates. So say I change this last digit from a 6 to a 7. You saw it move just a hair. I'll make it a bigger thing. We'll make it 77. You can see the marker moving around as we change these coordinates. Other things we can do, we can put a background on it, which is kind of ugly. That should stay hollow. So if you want to do anything with these markers, you can do it from here. Say you have a number of markers in one area and it's pretty cluttered, and you only want to look at 1 or 2, you can select markers and hide them from view. So I'm on our Pond 1 marker, I select hide, it disappears from the map. It's still there, it just doesn't display, so I can come back and I can unhide it, right? Pretty simple, not too complicated, pretty easy. Okay, let's talk a little bit about segmenting the map. When we get to a particular search area, we might be the first folks there, and we need to break a large area up into small pieces so we can assign teams to them and start clearing them out. The easiest way to do that is switch over to your aerial view. That'll give you a better idea of what's actually on the ground. And let's say that this structure here is our last known point. So I'm going to grab a marker, drop it on there, call that the last known point. And then what I want to do is start looking for good candidates for search areas. So this chunk of land here looks like it's bounded by a power line. There's some houses over here, parts of a road, and a creek, right? So those are all boundaries that folks on the ground should be able to identify easily. And that's the key. You want things that people on the ground can recognize and realize they're either in or out of their search area. It's tempting to use these grid lines, right? Because the whole map's broken into grid lines, but there's nothing on the ground that will tell a searcher he's within these white grid lines. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come up and grab my track tool, and this is basically a pen that lets you draw. So you hold down the left mouse button and start drawing. And if I continue to hold it down, I can trace over features. If I release it, what I can do, I can establish a bunch of different vertices based on straight lines. And if the terrain's not too bad, this usually works. Right? So you click and release as you go. Here's a nice big piece of straight line. All right, a little curvy here, so I can hold my mouse button down again. It gets straight. And then when I get near the end, I'm going to right click, go down to finish track, and there's one more step. Come and hover over your track again and click on toggle loop, right? So you'll notice that part closed up. All right, it's open, it's closed. When it's closed, what it's done, it's created a polygon that we can go and look at. So I'll select this information tool up here, click on the track, and this gives me all sorts of information about the area I just created. Most importantly, I know it's 68.3 acres, which is a good size for one team and a well-trained dog to cover. That's close to the standard we train to, so that looks like a good segment. Well, what else looks like a good candidate on here? Maybe this area to the south. So I've got another creek, part of a road, another road, and then another road. So we come back up to my track tool. Now what you'll notice is you can't draw a track right on top of another one. So back off a little bit, start drawing your track again. Down here, all right, nice big road. Come down here, do a couple of straight lines. I can zoom out by scrolling, and then zoom back in. All right, I gotta come over here, come back. All right, so I'm gonna go back to finish track, and then the next step, which is to toggle the loop, closes my loop up, select my information tool, select my track. All right, this is a 91 acre segment, right? A little bit bigger, but still not bad, especially with this big open bit in the middle. So those are two good search areas. So I can close that. If for any reason you want to shade these in or change the color, you go to Edit Track, and this is just like the marker menu. You can change the color of the line to whatever you like. You can also fill it in, so there's this fill and loop option over here. So if I select that, I can pick a pattern. I'm fond of this crosshatch here. Change the color to match the border, and I just want to fill on the inside. Hit OK, and now my border or my polygon fills in with a hatch mark pattern. So I can also hide the whole polygon. All right, back and forth, just like the marker tool. Pretty easy to use. So what you would do is you would just keep creating segments until you have enough to start assigning teams to, and kind of go from there. So that is basically how you segment a map. You repeat that process over and over, and that's how you do it. All right, just a real quick note on some of the measurement tools. If you come up to the toolbar, there's a couple that stick out. There's a straight line measurement tool, and what you do is you select the tool, you drop a point on the map, you drop a second point on the map, and it gives you a rough estimate of the distance. You can right click and go to more information, look at your start point, your end point, the total distance in feet and meters, and the heading. Right, so that could be useful for just a real quick, how far is it from here to here? The one right below it does the same thing, but you can do it for multiple legs. So start there, we'll go down here. All right, so there's our little line. Right click. So we started, we ended. We know the series of lines we just drew are 4,500 feet or 1.3 kilometers. Again, quick way to estimate distances on the map. Another very useful tool is this range ring tool. You'll remember from managing the lost person incident that everything in search and rescue is based off of statistics and history and case studies to give us a better idea of where we should be looking, and most importantly, how far from a given area we should be looking. So one of the easiest ways to do that is you can drop a set of range rings on a point, and it gives you a default setting. But then if you were to right click and go to edit your range ring, we can go into our lost person profiles and say we're looking for a child that's been missing for 3 hours. We know that kids between 3 and 6, let's say, travel at 1.5 miles an hour. So what you do is you enter those two variables in and you close, and then if you zoom out, you'll get rings. So he's been gone, what the distance is between each of these rings should be the 1.5 miles. So each one of these rings is an hour's worth of travel. You'll notice pretty quickly that it's a huge search area, but there's other things we can do to kind of eliminate those. You'll remember from MLPI that physical barriers and natural barriers will contain subject. So we've got a river up here. We're going to assume that little Timmy did not cross the river. We're also going to assume that he didn't get out into the Atlantic Ocean, so we can, start tightening our possible search area. He wouldn't have crossed this road. Those are things you can do with the range rings, just to give you an idea of how big of a problem you may be looking at. Another application, if for some reason you wanted to set for a specific distance, so you can come in here and say you want to drop a series of 5 rings, and every 1,000 meters you wanted a ring put down, for whatever you're going to use that measurement for. There's some tools in here, again, just like with the markers, you can change colors, you can hide things from view, you can change the style of the line. It's a pretty endless combination of options in here. So we'll do a couple of those and close it. And so now we've got a range ring centered on our last known point, and so every 1,000 meters there's a circle, right? And so we can use that to kind of estimate radio range or how far the subject might have traveled, all sorts of good things. It's just a quick way to, draw some containment on your map and see what you're looking at. Okay, let's talk about working with GPS data. What I've done, I've taken my Garmin 60 and I connected the computer via the USB cable. And the first thing I need to do is come up to the GPS menu and make sure everything's set up properly. So I come down to Setup, and I get the same menu that you got had you gone through Preferences, and I'm just verifying that it's set to Garmin 60 CSX USB. That's the one we want. So I select that option and hit Close. If you weren't sure what you had or don't see your unit in the menu, there's a GPS setup wizard you can use, and it's a wizard, so I won't go all the way through it, but basically it walks you through the steps you need to do to connect your unit to Terrain Navigator. So if you ever run into trouble, that's good to know. So the situation we have is a team just came back from the field and they handed you their unit, and you need to get the information off of it. So I'm going to come back up to GPS menu, and this time I want to receive from the GPS. Now, Terrain Navigator, one of the quirks of the program is that you have to download waypoints, routes, and track logs separately. You can't just pull everything in to the system like you can on Google Earth. However, it's still pretty easy. So we want to get the waypoints off of the unit. So I click on waypoints, and then the computer is going to talk to the GPS. It's going to read the information off of it, and then it presents me with a list of waypoints that are on the unit. So I can grab all of these at once by selecting my first point and then holding down Control and clicking on these. I can select just the first one or the bottom one, which is the ones I want. I just want the start and end point. So I select those and I hit OK, and it tells me it pulled 2 points onto the map, and there they are, start and end. Alright, the next thing I need to go back and grab the track logs. So receive from GPS, receive track logs. Again, all the tracks that are on the GPS show up. I just want track 000, so I select that one and hit OK, and it shows up. So it's as easy as that. And just like before, you can go back in and edit the track and change the colors and all those things that we already know how to do. The other scenario is that I have some information on the map I want to send to the GPS. So let's go down to the 2 search areas we created earlier, and I want to take these and send them to the GPS so the guys in the field have something on their map. So I can do that one of 2 ways. I can come to each track. I'm going to switch over to the aerial view real quick so you can see them better. I can come to each track, I can right click and send a GPS straight from there. And if I click on that, it goes right onto the GPS, no problem. But if I had more than one, what I want to do, I want to come up to GPS and go to Send to GPS, come down to Tracks, and just like it read off of the unit which tracks and markers were on the unit, this tells me which tracks are on the computer. So the search areas recreated, I believe, were track 0001 and 0003. I select those 2, click Send, and as quick as that, it sends it over to the GPS. So that's how you use the GPS with Terrain Navigator. Okay, so you've got your pretty map made up. It's got all sorts of cool data on here, and you want to print a copy out to hand to a searcher so they can go out in the field. You're going to come up here to File, go down to Print, and this pulls up the print dialog box. So one of the first things you want to check is how it's laid out. And the way you do that, you come over here to Templates, and I've set the default template to the old style Terrain Navigator page with grid. And what that gives me, it gives me some scale bars, some information at the bottom, our declination indicator, and it throws a USNG grid over the top of the map. Right, so this is all good stuff. So that's our default template. On properties, if you don't quite like something, you can edit a little bit. Like on this scale, we don't need miles, yards, and kilometers. We might want something else. So I come over here to map, and then I go to scale, and now I can edit my scale options. So I don't need miles on there. Take that off. I don't really need yards on there. Let's do just plain old meters and get rid of kilometers. Alright, well, let's do this. Let's do meters at the top and no kilometers, right? So then I can shrink it down a little bit, and there you go. So there's a frame around it. You know, you can edit, you can play with these things till your heart's content. If I really want to, I can come down and edit some of this text. You can add text to it. So, you know, play with this all you want. Once it's set, it'll stay standard. You shouldn't have to worry about it too much, but in case you wanted to, that's how you edit stuff. The other thing to do is come over to, let's go there. Okay, so you've got all your stuff on the map the way you want it set. It's a topographic map. It's coming in at 1 to 12,000. Well, I need it to be out a little bit further, so I'll type in 24,000, update, and so it zooms out a little bit for me. But I need this reservoir to be in the middle. So come over here. I've got my little drag tool. Left click, hold the mouse button down, drag my mouse, and it will reposition the map for me. So now the reservoir is right in the middle of the map. I don't really want to look at topo. I'd rather have aerial. So I'll come down and I'll pull in my pre-cached aerial imagery. I can click on that and you'll see it starts loading. It takes the stuff that's already on the computer and loads it, and it's going to try to grab other stuff off the internet. If you have a network connection, this will populate. If imagery is cached onto the computer, it will populate. If not, it's not going to. So again, we'll try to have those things on the computer ahead of time, but just be aware. So I'm going to switch this back to topographic, and it's 1 to 24,000. Format, don't worry about that. I want all the layers to print. What else is on here? If I come over here to printer, I can select which printer I want it to go to. I can select if I want it to be portrait or landscape, so I can flip it around. Now it's a landscape map. Let's put it back to portrait. If you wanted to create this as an electronic document because you want to email it to someone, you don't need to print it, you can select the output down here. The most common type is JPEG. You can also do a KMZ or a TIFF. A TIFF is a very high quality image file. It's going to take up a lot of space. It will take a lot of time to render. So I'd stick with JPEG. It works pretty well. Don't mess with the dimensions or the pixels. Not something you need to mess with. Once you have all that set, you can come up here to print. You can actually print the map, or you can go to export, and it should pull up a menu where you can save the map somewhere. So Newberry search 1. Alright, I've saved that to my documents folder. Click save. It'll crank away here for a few seconds, and it actually does take a little bit of time because it's taking all of this data and it's trying to compress it into an image file. You know, however, it does produce a pretty high quality product when it's all said and done. And that's very useful if you needed to ship something over to command, or if you wanted to send something to a handler so they can have for their records. Very useful tool, a nice feature. we'll go ahead and take a look at that. So I'll open up my documents. We'll look in here. It should be the last thing I modified. Scroll down a little bit. Okay, so here's our map. We'll right click on the properties here. The file came out to be 4 megs, which is a pretty good size, especially if you're trying to run things over a hotspot or a wireless. But that's okay, that's not huge. That's an emailable file. And what you get a pretty decent map. If you zoom in here, it's not as good as looking at Terrain Navigator, but you know, it's pretty good. It's good enough for what we're doing. So, handy feature. If I would have printed this, it would have come out on the printer and you could just pick it up. So, once you're done with this dialog box, just close it in the corner here and that's it.